living la vida low carb. This show is changing lives. We talking about your diet, trying to get you feeling right. Cut up them avocados, fry some eggs, time to explore the longest running health podcast, hosted by Jimmy Moore. Time to give up the crappy garbage, we're getting into ketosis. Every day is a new step to your goal, yeah, you're getting closer. Motivated and focused, don't stop, just go. Time to get inspiration from the Living La Vida Low Carb Show. Hey, the livinglowcarbshow.com.
Today I have a brand new study, and it's going to be a good one if you are a fan of the carnivore diet. So the title of this paper that was published in the journal Current Developments in Nutrition back in November of 2021, the title is Behavioral Characteristics and Self-Reported Health Status Among 2,029 Adults Consuming a Carnivore Diet. So the researchers are Belinda Lenners, Jacob May, Owen Hen, and then the most familiar name on this list is Dr. David Ludwig. So if you're watching this and you're listening to this on my podcast, head on over to Jimmy Makes Science Simple over on Instagram. This is where I go over the latest and greatest in studies as it relates to nutrition and health, both pro and con. So today's is very much a pro if you are a fan of ketogenic diets, meat-based, carnivore diets, that kind of thing. So let's dig into this one. Abstract. In the background, it says the carnivore diet, which is based on animal foods and excludes most or all plant-based foods, has attracted recent popular attention. However, very little is known about the health effects and the tolerability of this diet. There's also concerns about nutrient deficiencies and cardiovascular disease risk have all been raised. So what is the objective of this study? We obtained a descriptive data on the nutritional practices and the health status of a large group of carnivore diet consumers. So what did they do? The methods in the study. A social media survey was conducted from March the 30th through June the 24th, 2020, which is interesting because that's right at the beginning of the pandemic. So it's kind of fascinating they decided to do this study right when everybody was locking down and a lot of people were eating junk food and started eating weight. They actually were testing the carnivore diet in a study. That was kind of interesting. So they did this among adults who self-identified as eating a carnivore diet for at least 6 months. Survey questions interrogated them about their motivation, their dietary intake, their symptoms suggestive of nutritional deficiencies or other adverse effects, their satisfaction level with the diet, prior and current health conditions, anthropometrics, and lab data. So they did a thorough kind of look at what this diet was doing to these people that professed to be on it for at least 6 months. All right, so what were the results? This is still the abstract. They give you the quick overview, kind of the Cliff's Notes, and then we'll get into the meat, all pun intended, of the study. The results were a total of 2,029 respondents with an average age of 44 years old. 67% of them were male, reported consuming a carnivore diet for 14 months. The range was between 9 and 20 with the study data points. They were motivated primarily by health reasons. 93% of them were doing it for their health. Red meat consumption was reported daily by 85%. So almost all of them were eating red meat in their carnivore diet. Under 10% reported having vegetables, fruits, or grains monthly. I mean, if it's a true carnivore diet, you're having 0 monthly, but I suppose if you throw in an avocado every once in a while, it's not a big deal. I can't imagine what grains you would put in there. I'm just trying to rack my brain. What carnivore person is eating any grains at all? Anywho, 37% did not take any vitamin supplements. So that's interesting as well. The prevalence of adverse symptoms was very low. Only about 1 to 5.5% talked about having adverse symptoms eating a carnivore diet. That's pretty good. The symptoms did include, for that 1 to 5.5%, gastrointestinal issues, muscular issues, and dermatologic. So look, gastrointestinal, that can happen early on in a carnivore diet. I know Sean Baker has talked very extensively about this, as has Paul Saladino, that when you first start, your body kind of has to get used to having that much protein and fat if you're not used to having that. I remember Joe Rogan went on the carnivore diet last January, and he talked about, yeah, it was great, it felt great, except I had a lot of diarrhea. Well, that was his body. There's probably a die-off period in the gut where you're shifting some of the microbiome if you're only eating meat when you're used to having a mixed diet. And so diarrhea is pretty normal, and that could explain the gastrointestinal with the 3 to 5% of the people that had that. Muscular issues from 4%, that could be from electrolytes, that if you don't get proper electrolyte supplementation, that can actually lead to some muscle aches and pains. Get the little Charlie horse and things like that. So get enough salt, potassium, magnesium, all the things that come with electrolytes, as well as great hydration. That could mitigate that one. And then dermatologic are breakouts on the skin, which again, if you're shifting over to a brand new diet from kind of maybe a crappy diet or maybe more carbs in it and then suddenly no carbs, I mean, there's going to be a little bit of a fiery storm to start as it's releasing some of those toxins. So none of those things I think are indicative of a carnivore diet. They're more indicative of just shifting your diet in general. But again, very low prevalence, from 1% to 5.5% of the respondents. That means over 90% of them, almost 95%, had no adverse reaction to the carnivore diet. That's pretty good. Participants also reported very high levels of satisfaction and improvements in their overall health. 95% of them said that. They also enjoyed better overall well-being, 69 to 91%. Various medical conditions got better, 48 to 93%. And their body mass index went from 27.2 to 24.3 kilograms per meter. Among a subset reporting current lipid values, that's their cholesterol, LDL cholesterol was markedly elevated at 172 milligrams per deciliter, whereas their HDL cholesterol, 68 grams per deciliter, and their triglycerides, which was also 68 milligrams per deciliter, were optimal, which is great. You want that 1-to-1 ratio between the HDL and the triglycerides. And that triglyceride to HDL ratio should be 1 or below. And in the study, on average, it was exactly 1. Participants with diabetes also reported benefits, reducing their BMI from 4.3 kilograms per meter to down to 1.4. So, I mean, it went down significantly, it looks like. HbA1c dropped 0.4%, so that's good. And the diabetes medication use dropped 84 to 100%. In other words, if they went on the carnivore diet and they had diabetes, almost all of them, and this is type 2 diabetes, almost all of them got better. So the conclusions in the study, and again, I'm still just reading from the abstract. Contrary to common expectations, adults who are consuming a carnivore diet experienced very few adverse effects, and instead reported health benefits as well as high satisfaction rates. Cardiovascular risk factors were variable. The generalizability of these findings and the long-term effects of this dietary pattern still require further study. But this is a good start. If we can get a study out there that shows, look, carnivore and eating animal foods is healthy, that it actually causes improvements in your health, not adverse effects, and the people enjoy it and their satisfaction and there's retention rate. The biggest thing with diets is getting people to stick with them, because most diets are loathed because people don't enjoy them. But on the carnivore diet, and in this particular study, they found great enjoyment on the diet and thus great efficacy. All right, so let's go over this report here. All right. There's a lot of the pre-stuff that they put in here, so let me skip past that. It just gives the acronyms and all that kind of thing. So, introduction. Here's the beginning of the study. Dietary variety is near universally recommended in the national guidelines to satisfy human nutritional needs. Yes, if you take a look at the 2020 Dietary Guidelines for Americans, it's very monolithic. It's this is the way you eat, and there's no veering from that plan. And so, dietary variety, no, they don't push dietary variety in the dietary guidelines. They do say a consumption of a variety of food groups from plants and animal food sources has been linked to favorable health outcomes in various epidemiologic studies, as well as in some clinical trials. It's also expected to satisfy the recommended daily reference intakes of various macronutrients, micronutrients, and food components. So things like protein, carbs, fat for the macros, vitamins and minerals for the micros, and then things like fiber for food components. Nevertheless, restrictive diets have long been promoted for various health and philosophical reasons. One notable eating pattern, a vegan diet, totally eliminates animal foods. It's been promoted as ethical, environmental, and healthy, including giving people who do it a reduction in their BMI, the body mass index, improvement in their cholesterol, and cancer prevention. However, these reported benefits may be confounded by dietary and non-dietary health behaviors, and some negative effects have been reported. Vegan diet consumers may not meet the daily recommended intake for vitamin B12, for calcium, for protein, and other adverse events, such as an increase in bone fractures, have been observed. This has always been the funny thing about vegan diets. Why do they get the big health halo when it's obvious there are deficiencies in a vegan diet, which were just brilliantly outlined in the introduction here? Vitamin B12, calcium, and protein. I had a lady write me. I interviewed her about a decade ago on the Live and La Vida Low Carb show. She wrote me this week and she said, Jimmy, last time you and I talked, I was on your podcast. I was talking about my vegan diet. You were very kind to me. You were explaining to me some of the benefits of eating animal foods, and I wasn't having anything of it. And I just wanted you to know I have now developed severe vitamin B12 deficiency. My bones had started deteriorating because she wasn't eating enough protein. Everybody thinks muscle with eating protein, but it actually is a lot of your health, including your bone health, needs protein, and she wasn't getting enough. So now she's on monthly injections of vitamin B12, and her health is at great risk. And she said, please get the word out. So I will be doing a post about that very soon. But it just goes to show you, she bought into the notion that this was the healthy way to eat. And look, people feel good when they go on a vegan diet because it's coming off of a crap diet. So if you go from a crap diet to vegan, at least you're going on real food. But then the vegan diet is incomplete. It's not giving you all the things that you need, which is why vegan's a good start, I suppose, if you're eating a crappy garbage diet, but eventually try to find those things that are going to meet all of your macronutrient, micronutrient, and other food component needs. Recently, popular interest has grown in the very opposite of the vegan diet, the carnivore diet. It seeks to eliminate most or all of the plant-based foods. Various social media groups, especially one on Facebook called World Carnivore Tribe, have been formed with membership of many thousands, both in the US and around the world, that promote this diet for health and other benefits. Whereas diets high in animal foods have been commonly discouraged due to their high saturated fat content and low density of essential nutrients and bioactive compounds, things like fiber and phytonutrients, very little is known about the health status of people who habitually follow a carnivore eating diet pattern. According to a common view, long-term consumption of a strictly animal-based diet would be associated with nutrient deficiencies and confer negative health effects compared to a plant-based diet, including having poor gut and gut microbiota health, adverse cardiovascular disease risk pattern, and then other chronic health complications. So for the record, by the way, I have now been eating carnivore, mostly carnivore, for 4 years. I was keto before that, and before keto I was low carb, and before that I was the very, very, very sad standard American diet. So I can personally attest to what it feels like to eat a carnivore diet, mostly carnivore diet, because I've done this now for a little while. Did you go keto and thought you had to give up wine? Well, let me introduce you to Dry Farm Wines. It is the world's first sugar-free alcohol that is lower than your typical wines, organic, made at local farms that do it the right way. Most of the wines that you buy are from 3 really big companies, loaded with additives and preservatives, so many dozens of those kinds of things. You don't want all that junk in your wine. So go to dryfarmwines.com/Jimmy and they will ship you these wines. And just because you listen to this podcast, Dry Farm Wines is going to give you a bottle in your first order for just 1 cent. Go to dryfarmwines.com/Jimmy and you will get your bottle of wine for just 1 singular penny. Go check them out. Dry Farm Wines, you guys. It's wine o'clock somewhere. Let's go get some wine. Little evidence exists for the sustainability of carnivore diets derived from historic reports on Arctic or nomadic societies, clinical case studies, as well as accounts on nutrition therapy for people with diabetes in the pre-insulin era around 1920. Early reports by Arctic researchers and population surveys provide evidence that animal-based diets with little to no plant matter were consumed by traditional populations at high latitude during most of the year. So this would be the Inuit Eskimos, and I know that the Inuits are the specific tribe that Stefansson was the researcher, and he went and lived with them for a period of time, only ate the animal-based foods in their diet. And he comes back and he's like, hey guys, you're not going to believe this. I met this culture of people and they only eat meat and they survived. And none of the people believed him. And so what he did was he ended up locking himself up in a metabolic ward for a year, only eating meat, because they were like, oh, you're going to get scurvy, you're vitamin C deficient, you're this, that, and then. And he put himself willingly in a metabolic ward right after having lived out with these Inuit Eskimos and living on their diet. He then comes back and has to put himself in a metabolic ward to prove to his colleagues that he wasn't lying about the data that he had gathered. They didn't believe him. And then he comes out the other side of that 1 year in the metabolic ward. Health is spectacular. He did not develop scurvy. And lo and behold, they were like, oh, okay. But nothing came of it. Like, that was the bad part. He went through all that to prove the point that was different than what the conventional wisdom was saying, and yet he still, in the end, it still didn't make a difference. They didn't really give him the credence that he deserved. These diets by these traditional cultures are associated with good health and longevity. Inspired by their experiences, the 2 Arctic explorers, Stefansson being one of them, participated in a study partly conducted under strict inpatient observation of a diet only consisting of meat. After 1 year, they reported good health, no clinical evidence of any vitamin deficiencies, although a negative calcium balance was reported. They probably could have added in a little bit of dairy and shored up that calcium imbalance. Of course, the animal-based diets consumed in this study incorporated lean and fatty meats. It also included a variety of organ meats. These were frequently boiled. Sometimes they ate them raw, with potential implications to the availability of low concentration of nutrients. Likewise, inspired by observations on the indigenous diet in St. Luca, Dr. John Rollo in 1797 successfully treated 2 patients with diabetes with a diet consisting only of meat and fat. Rollo recommended near complete elimination of plant foods, a prescription that was widely adopted and empirically optimized to prolong the life of the people with diabetes back in the 19th century. Recognizing the link between carbohydrate intake and glucose, some physicians allowed intake of low-carb vegetables, while others promoted a strictly meat and fat-based approach for diabetes management. Once the discovery of insulin came around in the 1930s, these dietary approaches were abandoned in favor of the much less restrictive mixed diets and modern research on an animal-based diet is sparse. So you want to know why animal-based diets aren't as embraced as they once were. We discovered insulin. I mean, it's such a shame that something that was life-saving. Look, when insulin came around, and especially for those people with the autoimmune disease of type 1 diabetes, it was a miracle that they were able to have insulin for that purpose. The problem is they started using insulin not just with type 1 diabetes, but people with type 2 diabetes. And okay, we'll have a mixed diet and then it's a little more palatable. You'll enjoy it more. And I'm thinking, have you had just a meat-based diet? Like, I have never been on a more enjoyable diet in my entire life. Yes, I get it. If you're used to eating bread and you're used to eating sweet and you're used to eating, kind of a variety, it can be weird when you first start on a carnivore diet. But look, once you get on it, the methodicalness of it, of, okay, well, what meat am I going to eat today? Okay, what mixture of meats am I going to have today? Can I throw an egg on top of a steak and cook that? Like, it's not as bad as people want to make it out to be. They think that it's kind of a prison sentence to have to just eat meat, just eat animal foods. Not me. I've been on enough low-fat diets in my life, you guys, and I know a lot of you have as well, that getting to eat meat and full fats, that is luxurious compared to all those low-fat diets that I used to have to go on and eating rice cakes and bland, fat-free everything and lean meats and being hungry. The satiety you get, the satisfaction you get with the tastiness, especially if you've got a grill and you can smoke some meat. Oh, it's just why. And it all started with the invention of and discovery of insulin. Isn't that interesting? Although several contemporary treatments for obesity or type 2 diabetes promote high intake of meat and fat, things like the Atkins diet, these types of diets typically include or reintroduce after a short period of time the consumption of low-carb vegetables and low-sugar fruits, whereas a recent perspective suggests that all essential nutrients can actually come from a carnivore diet. And that's true. If you eat nose to tail, and you don't just eat the muscle meats, you actually add in a lot of the offal, as they call it, OFFAL, all the little bits and pieces, the liver, the brain, the heart, all of those things, can provide you with literally all the nutrition you want. People often say that. I was at the farmer's market a couple months back, and I had 20 pounds of grass-fed beef, and the lady's like, well, where's your vegetables? And I'm like, oh, I eat a carnivore diet. What's that mean? Oh, I only eat animal foods. And she's like, where do you get your vitamins from? Where do you get your this from? Where do you get your that from? And I'm like, it's all in the meat. I mean, let's not pretend like it's just a blob of protein and fat. It's more than that. And the sooner people realize that, especially when you get it from a quality source like a grass-fed cow, it's totally good for you. Therefore, the aim of this study was to characterize the motivation, the diet patterns, the self-perceived health status, the satisfaction of a large group of adults habitually consuming a carnivore diet, and thereby to provide insights into this poorly characterized dietary approach. All right, so the design of the study, they used an online survey. They collected self-reported data from respondents who self-identified as a carnivore diet adherent for a minimum of 6 months. The aim was to characterize the diet consumed by the participants, to describe perceived health status and changes in health since they started on the diet, to assess the perceived symptoms of any nutrient deficiencies or other adverse effects, and to evaluate the satisfaction and acceptance of consuming a carnivore diet. This study was approved by the Boston College Hospital Institutional Review Board. Electronic consent was obtained by all of the participants in the study. There was no restriction on the data use. The only identifiable data that was collected were their email addresses. These were removed upon completion of the data collection and eliminating duplicate responses. So they kept it pretty private, but at the same time got quality information. Pause a second because my water machine is making a very loud buzz and it is distracting my brain. So I'll be right back. Hang tight. Sometimes I have to give that thing a whack to make it stop buzzing. So forgive me for that. All right, I'm going to get back to the study. So let's look at the methods used. So we just looked at the design. Let's look at the participants and enrollment. Respondents were recruited from open social media communities, including the World Carnivore Tribe on Facebook, Instagram. They found various carnivore people on Instagram, the Zero Carn B Reddit page, the Zeroing In on Health Facebook page, Twitter, and then other sources. So they went around. They didn't just stick with one group. They went around the various groups online to find the carnivore people. Inclusion criteria, they required you to be at least 18 years old, and you should be consuming a carnivore diet for at least 6 months by self-report. Following a 2 eligibility question, a link to the study survey was displayed and then sent by email. They gave 3 reminders provided over a 1-month period. Survey data acquisition was conducted between March 30th and June 24th, 2020. As such, data collection occurred right at the period of the beginning of the pandemic, when most people were in lockdown. Of the initial 3,883 respondents, 1,418 were excluded due to their age, diet duration, incomplete screening information, declining to participate, and then not starting the survey. Most of them in the decline, they just never did the survey. They got accepted to be a part of the study, and then 1,058 of them decided, I'm not going to fill out the survey. So why did you sign up for it if you didn't want to take the survey? Duplicate survey responses were identified on the basis of email addresses and deleted. There was 28 of those. Participants who did not provide at least a diet start date and food intake frequency information, 126 people in that category, and whose diet start date was within 6 months of study participation, which was 282 of them. All of those were excluded. So they took out all of the confounding variables of people that did not actually qualify to be in the study. So by the time they eliminated all those people, there were a total of 2,029 respondents eligible and willing to participate to provide sufficient information to be included in the study. Look, over 2,000 people, that's pretty good. They were able to follow some patterns there. All right, what were the data collection and treatments? Survey instruments. Data were collected and managed with research electronic data capture. Survey questions were developed in consultation with members of the carnivore diet community and addressed several domains, which we've talked about, some of those things, the diet satisfaction, any medical conditions, frequency of eating, blah, blah, blah. Multiple choice questions were used to solicit specific habits, the reasons why they chose the diet, the medical conditions, and their medication intake. Modified Likert scales were used to determine the frequency of intake of various food categories and other such things. Highest educational attainment was categorized as primary school or less, secondary, post-secondary, or tertiary. Participants were asked to specify their income category as either lower, middle, or upper. And this is interesting because a lot of people look at the carnivore diet and they think it's only an upper class type of diet because people that don't have money can't afford to buy meat is what they say. So that's interesting. They broke that down. Race and ethnicity were also self-reported with various multiple choice and free text options. Self-reported anthropometric and lab data were collected within 1 to 5 years respectively before the diet, present within a year of taking the survey, and then at least 3 months after starting the carnivore diet. Participants were asked to specify source of all the data as clinician or self-measured, and the data were then prioritized in that order. So they're getting their ducks in a row of what they were looking at here. All right, so the units of the measure, we don't really need to go over that because they're looking at all the different things they tested and then how they tested it. They did throw in ketone testing, so beta-hydroxybutyrate was in there, C-reactive protein, some of the various things. All right. They also calculated BMI. All right, that's some of the weed stuff. All right. A lot of people ask me, Jimmy, how do you get such good deep sleep. Well, there's a lot of things that I do, but one of the newest things that I recently added is this upgraded magnesium from a company called Upgraded Formulas. Go to their website, upgradedformulas.com, and you can learn all about this nano technology that they use for this particular mineral of magnesium. Again, it's called Upgraded Magnesium, and it's got all the different forms of magnesium in it using the nanotechnology, so it gets absorbed a lot better. Guys, I have seen my deep sleep improve by as much as 30 to 40% simply by adding in this product along with sunshine exposure, darkness in the room, cooler temperature, all of the things that I always have done. So again, upgradedformulas.com is the website. Go check them out. Now we're at the fun part of the study. What were the results? The participants' description, most respondents were from the United States, Canada, Europe, or Australia. 67% were male, 83% were white and non-Hispanic, 64% completed college or a college equivalent. Income spanned all classes, with 14% reporting being in the low class of income, 66% being in the middle class, and 20% being high income. 7 women were pregnant and 10 were breastfeeding at 12 months postpartum in the study. The median time following the carnivore diet was 14 months. 93% of the participants said the reason they went on the carnivore diet was to get healthy. So the food intake, red meat other than pork, beef, lamb, venison, buffalo, and goat was the most commonly consumed food, followed by eggs, as well as non-milk dairy, poultry, pork, and seafood were eaten less often. Yeah, I eat some pork. I've got a pork sausage I get from the farmer at the farmer's market. I'm not a big fan of chicken just because it kind of makes me hungry, although I do have a rotisserie every once in a while. And then seafood, I have a love-hate with seafood. When I want seafood, I have seafood. But when I do have seafood, I almost invariably get hungry. Even with the so-called fatty fish, I get hungry from eating seafood. So I would probably fall in that category of least often eating that. Weekly or more frequent consumption was reported for organ meats by 42%, for non-milk dairy by 72%. Less than 10% of respondents consumed starchy vegetables, non-starchy vegetables, fruits or grains more often than once a month. 37% reported no use of any vitamin supplements at all. Use of other over-the-counter supplements that are dietary, herbal, digestive enzymes, and antioxidants was then denied by 75% of the people in the study. Alcohol rarely consumed. 76% reported frequency of less than once a month or never of drinking alcohol. More than 50% of the participants drank coffee at least daily. In contrast to the typical Western standard American diets, few individuals following the carnivore diet reported consuming any fast food. I know there's some people that do carnivore. They'll go to McDonald's and they'll just ask for the burger patties, or on the West Coast, I know a lot of the West Coasters, they go to In-N-Out Burger and what is that? The Flying Dutchman they get. So it's like burger, cheese, another burger. So yeah, I mean, there's different people that do it different ways, but that's interesting that most of them didn't go with fast food. What's really fascinating, over half of them drank coffee at least daily. There was this debate among kind of the purists in the carnivore space that, oh, well, if you're carnivore, you don't drink coffee. That's from a bean. That's a plant. And it's like, I think if you get to that level of carnivore strictness, no, don't do that. Like, give people their coffee. Come on. Most participants reported eating 1 to 3 times a day. I eat twice a day. Differentiation between meals and snacks was not queried. 16% of the people in the study had 3 meals a day. 64% were in the category that I eat twice a day. 17% once a day. Generally, more participants reported choosing cuts of meat with high or moderate fat. 61% got high fat. 37% got moderate fat. Only 2% got lean cuts of meats on their carnivore diet. 76% reported a preference for consuming meat at raw, rare, or medium rare. The bioavailability of all the nutrients in it is much better when you slightly cook it versus cooking it more than medium rare. The intention to achieve nutritional ketosis was reported by 41%. So that's the people eating keto carnivore, among whom 41% monitored their ketones, 56% intended to achieve a medium or high level of salt. So again, like saturated fat being vilified in the culture, so has salt. And so they purposely are adding salt, 56% of them. A commonly recommended in the setting of low-carb diets associated with an increase prevention of like the Charlie horses and deficiencies in electrolytes. All right. Perceived health-related outcomes. Participants reported improvements in their chronic medical conditions, general health, and aspects of well-being, things like energy, sleep, strength, endurance, mental clarity, memory, and focus. Prevalence of specific medical conditions and changes in their severity were also reported. While most queried medical conditions improved with diet, lipid abnormalities were variable. 56% of the participants reported resolution or improvement. 18% saw stability on the carnivore diet. 27% said they found a new occurrence or worsening. I'm going to probably caveat that 27% of new occurrence or worsening. If somebody's cholesterol goes up, that does not mean you had a worse health outcome. I've got another study that I'll be highlighting very soon that I have here that talks about why there is a certain percentage of the population of people who start eating a keto or carnivore or low carb diet and why their LDL and total cholesterol goes up. I'll be highlighting that very soon on Jimmy Makes Science Simple. But let's just say that 27% reporting a new occurrence or worsening in their health, it could be that their cholesterol went up. Cholesterol going up in and of itself is not a bad thing. Triglycerides going up is a very bad thing. Small, dense LDL particles, very bad thing. But just LDL and total cholesterol going up, not an adverse effect. And I would guess that most of that new occurrence or worsening that's reported in the 27%, that's what they're referring to. Ophthalmologic conditions were also improved and unchanged with equal frequency. All right. The mean BMI decreased from 27.2 to 24.3, as observed with other diets low in carbohydrates. Total cholesterol and LDL were markedly elevated, whereas HDL cholesterol and triglycerides were in the optimal range, as we talked about earlier. The present ratio of triglycerides to HDL ratio was 1.0. Their CRP, which is a key inflammation marker, was decreased. Other liver enzymes, creatinine, HbA1c, which is a measure of blood glucose, were all unchanged. That's good. CAC score was low. That's the heart calcium score, the CT heart scan. Very low numbers. And yet, when you talk to people in the mainstream and they say, oh, all that saturated fat on the red meat-based carnivore diet is going to clog your arteries. Guess what? The arteries of carnivore people is a big fat nothing. I can attest to that. I've had 2 CT heart scans over the past 10 years, and both of them came back 0, meaning no calcified plaque in my coronary arteries. And that's pretty indicative of a lot of people that eat a carnivore diet, and definitely a low-carb diet. Among the 262 respondents who had type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes, prior BMI, HbA1c, and triglycerides were higher compared to those without diabetes. Respondents with diabetes saw relatively large reductions in their BMI and their A1C. Diabetes medication use was significantly reduced. All the respondents with diabetes ended up discontinuing non-insulin injections. 84% discontinued their oral medications. 92% with type 2 diabetes discontinued their insulin. Obviously, the type 1s had to keep taking it, but I would assume the type 1s probably ended up taking less of their insulin. Reported prevalence of adverse effects or symptoms consistent with nutrient deficiencies was generally low and commonly preceded the diet. New or worsened diarrhea occurred in 5.5% of the people, constipation 3.1%, weight gain 2.3%, muscle cramps 4.0%, hair loss or thinning in 1.9%, insomnia 1.7%, dry skin 1.4%, itchiness 1.1%, brittle nails 1.1%, and arrhythmia of the heart 1.1%. All of those are very low. What it tells me is the vast majority of the people who eat a carnivore diet see incredible benefits with very little adverse effects. Worsening or incidence of any other assessed symptom occurred in less than 1% of the participants. Prevalence or incidence of symptoms were not increased compared to the overall group in participants who denied the use of vitamin supplements or consuming organ meat. All right. How about the satisfaction and the support? Participants reported high levels of overall satisfaction with the diet. The majority perceived no impact on their social life and neutral or positive supportiveness from their social contacts. Medical providers were perceived as neutral, supportive, and unsupportive by generally similar proportions. Yeah. Look, if you go online, you can find support. Just look on Instagram, Carnivore, and you will find your tribe. You will find all the people. I know Sean Baker has built a great community with Rivero Health that he's got out there. And again, Paul Saladino has his tribe. Judy Cho has hers. Steak and Butter Gal has her. Bella has her tribe. So, I mean, everybody's doing their thing to bring the people together and give the support. And then as far as the medical having kind of equal, neutral, supportive, and unsupportive, that's great news, because you would think across the board they would be very unsupportive. But the fact that there's even neutral and positives in there is a good thing. All right, so we're at the discussion part of the study. In this social media-based survey, a self-selected group of adults consuming a carnivore diet for at least 6 months reported having a perceived good health status, perceived absence of symptoms of nutritional deficiencies, and the highest satisfaction rates with this eating pattern. To our knowledge, this is the very first modern report on a large group of people habitually consuming very few plant foods, a dietary pattern broadly considered incompatible with good health. Weight loss and other health benefits were most frequently indicated as motivation for adopting a carnivore diet. In accordance with this possibility, respondents reported a substantial BMI reduction and improvements in their physical and mental well-being, overall health, and numerous chronic medical conditions. Respondents with diabetes reported a special benefit, including greater weight loss compared to the overall group, and marked reductions in their diabetes medication usage, as well as their HbA1c, notable findings in view of the generally low success of lifestyle interventions for obesity and diabetes. That's what gets me. If you have type 2 diabetes, one of the best things you can do is go on some kind of a carbohydrate restricted diet, and carnivore obviously fits that bill. So I'm not surprised that they see results, but because red meat is so vilified, saturated fat is so vilified, and some carbohydrates are glorified for people with type 2 diabetes, they are scared to try a carnivore diet. And that's a shame. That's the diet that would keep them off the drugs. That's the diet that would put their type 2 diabetes into remission. Somebody just wrote me this week in a Facebook message, is a keto diet helpful for type 2 diabetes? I was like, it's the answer. It's the answer. Cut out the thing that's causing that disease to get worse and watch how your health improves.
Have you experienced the dreaded keto flu? Did you know that most of these symptoms are actually due to your body dumping excess electrolytes? This is where Element comes in. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink mix with everything you need and nothing you don't. That means lots of salt with no sugar. Element is formulated to help anyone with their electrolyte needs and is perfectly suited to folks following a keto, low-carb, or paleo diet. Element contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio, 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium, with none of the junk, no sugar, no coloring, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. Everyone needs electrolytes, especially those on low-carb diets, or if you practice intermittent or extended fasting, if you're physically active, or sweat a lot. Add Element today and see how much better you feel and perform. Use the URL drinklmnt.com/Jimmy.
Although we did not formally assess the macronutrient breakdown, carb content in meat and other animal foods is very minimal, and inherent limits to protein intake exist. Both ancestral data and self-reported preference of fatty cuts of meat in our survey suggest high fat intake with the carnivore diet. Look, even the highest protein, I know there was a lot of debate in the keto carnivore community a few years back about should it be a high fat diet, a high protein diet. Even the highest protein diet is still a very high fat diet, because fat has 9 calories per gram and protein only has 4 calories per gram. You could have a 1-to-1 ratio of grams of protein and grams of fat in an animal foods-based diet, and it's still going to be 60-something% fat, which is still high fat. Yes, it's high in protein, but if you're talking about preponderance of what makes up the macronutrients, it's still very high in fat. You're not eating chicken breasts and only eating chicken breasts. Nobody's doing that. And so, some of the diets may provide relevant comparisons to ketogenic and Atkins diets. In meta-analyses of trials for type 2 diabetes, low versus high carb diets produce greater weight loss, lower A1C, reduction in glucose-lowering medications, consistent with all the observations we found in our study, while general dietary adherence and glycemic effects will diminish over time. The findings of one recent non-randomized trial suggest that a very low-carb diet may actually be sustainable and efficacious when combined with high-intensity individual support. So that's the big study that Volek and Finney and all of them have been working on for many years. I think it's probably in its like 4th or 5th year now, and I've featured them before. The study that they're doing. So really exciting things that are happening. Consistent with other low-carb diet studies, respondents reported a mixed blood lipid pattern. LDLC, a major conventional cardiovascular disease risk factor, was markedly elevated. HDL and triglycerides were favorable. However, LDL elevation when associated with low triglycerides, which is indicative of most low-carb diets, may actually reflect that you have large, fluffy lipoprotein particles. So the LDL is more protective, not harmful, possibly comprising a relatively low risk subtype. Indeed, the low ratio of triglycerides to HDL is suggestive of high insulin sensitivity and good cardiometabolic health. However, it's unclear whether this apparent benefit of the diet, together with the reported weight reduction and improved glucose control, would counterbalance or outweigh any increased risk from LDL. Look, I don't know how much longer we're going to have to fight this LDL elevation thing, but it's not really been relevant. I wrote a book a long time ago called Cholesterol Clarity. And in there, we talked about how LDL cholesterol, especially LDLC on a traditional cholesterol panel, is not the whole story. You really do have to break down what the kind of LDL is and is it large, fluffy? Is it small, dense? So NMR lipoprofile test is what you could use to test for that. And any doctor can run that for you. Beyond the macronutrient composition, the elimination of allergenic, inflammatory, or other food components may also be providing potential health benefits to those eating a carnivore diet. Food allergies and sensitivities are also common and predominantly related to plant-based foods. Some plant chemicals may produce adverse effects, such as lecithin in beans, cyanogenic glycosides in seeds, glycoalkaloids in potatoes. Indeed, over 50% of the survey participants started the carnivore diet because they wanted to improve all allergic, skin, or autoimmune conditions or their digestive health, and many reported improvements in inflammation and other related symptoms. Conversely, dietary intake may be low for vitamins that are typically derived from plant foods, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and grains, or from nutrient fortification of foods, things like milk, juice, cereal, pasta, and other grain products. although they usually fortify it with synthetic versions of vitamins, which are not as bioavailable and don't really help you as much. I used to get a trip about seeing boxes of cereal, fortified with 12 essential nutrients and vitamins, and I'm going, is it sprayed on? Like, how do you get it in there? Like, and you stripped it out to put it back in. It never made sense. It still doesn't make sense. Additionally, often unquantified phytochemicals like polyphenols are largely absent from the carnivore diet, although these phytochemicals do not have any evidence. They have been linked to having cardiovascular and cardiometabolic benefits. In people who eat meat only with exclusion of dairy, which was about 30% in the survey, calcium intake is also low, as illustrated by a low intake and negative calcium balance from the Stephenson and the other explorers. Although essential nutrients can presumably be derived in sufficient amounts from animal foods, they are present in less commonly consumed parts of the animal, such as fat and organ meats. They have vitamins A and D. Bone has calcium or may be reduced during the food preparation. Vitamin C can get diluted. Vitamin C is of particular interest as meats are not formally considered a good source of it. About less than 10% of your daily recommended intake come from meat. Typical symptoms of deficiencies in these vitamins would include dermatological, cognitive, or neurological. A worsening or new presentation of symptoms were reported in less than 2% of the survey participants, while the majority reported improvements, resolution, or no change in their environment, regardless of the intake of vitamins, organ meats, or dairy. Given the self-reported nature of all these findings, it remains unclear whether clinical or subclinical symptoms of any nutrient deficiencies were present. Research will be further needed to clarify the absence of perceived symptoms of any nutrient deficiencies and the underlying biochemical processes that govern long-term consumption of a carnivore diet. It is possible that requirements for some micronutrients may be lower in established dietary recommendations for the general populations, but relating to remodeling of the gut microbiome, the whole body metabolism, and nutrient utilization in the setting of a low-carb carnivore diet, which is analogous to the observations they look at with a vegan diet. Respondents in this study also reported high levels of satisfaction and little social impact from following a carnivore diet, which I think is great. I think carnivore, like keto, has become a little more mainstream. People aren't poo-pooing it nearly as much, and especially online, you can definitely find your tribe. There are a lot of us who eat carnivore, and you're going to find lots of love. I interview a lot of people on my podcast who talk about various things getting better in their health as a result of going on a ketogenic or a low carb or a carnivore diet, and it's beautiful. And when people hear those things, they're encouraged and they want to give it a go for themselves as well. Notably, medical providers were perceived as supportive, neutral, or unsupportive at the pretty similar rates, despite the discrepancy of the carnivore diets from the dietary guidelines. Yeah, carnivore and the dietary guidelines for Americans do not mesh up because they want you to have your healthy whole grains and your fruits and vegetables and this and that and low fat this and it's amazing that many medical professionals, I think a lot of doctors are at their wits' end. Hey, my patient is excited about something that's going to get them to be healthy. I'm going to support them in that, and that's a great move. Whereas meat is more expensive than grains and starch, it may be less expensive on a caloric basis, depending on your location and specific comparisons, than fresh fruits and non-starchy vegetables. And cost may be additionally offset by decreased expenditure for medications and other diabetes-related expenses. Our respondents spanned low to high income, suggesting against having a major financial barrier to the diet. I will tell you, my farmers market shut down for the winter. They're going to come back in the spring. So in the fall, right before they were going away, my grass-fed beef supplier, I was buying like pretty much everything they brought every week. I think one weekend I got 20 pounds in one weekend of grass-fed ground beef. And so I kept getting it, and it was like, and it's good quality, a good, nice local farmer. And so I support them. It was $8 a pound. and from a nutrient density standpoint, it's there. And I only eat, probably 1 to 2 pounds of that a day, because I'm also got eggs that I eat and other foods. And so that will last me a while. And that's my food. That's it. I'm not buying Coca-Cola and chips and Little Debbie snack cakes and going to fast food and here and there and everywhere. And suddenly I've spent $50 on food in a day. I spend about maybe $15 to $20 on food in a day. Is it more expensive? You be the judge. Our study does not address several important concerns related to the consumption of an animal-based diet. Intensive animal production, typically with use of commodity grains and soy for feed, causes significant environmental harms and raises ethical issues about animals and their treatment. These concerns may be mitigated to some degree by integrating what I was just talking about, going to a farmer's market and buying from a local farmer, grass-fed beef, pasture-based agricultural systems and other interventions, also using algal feed additives to reduce the greenhouse gas. For context, industrial scale commodity grain monoculture may also cause substantial environmental loss, impact, and a loss of wildfire. These findings must be interpreted cautiously in view of several major design limitations. So listen to this. Our survey assessed the perception of individuals following a carnivore diet and did not objectively assess the diet, the nutrient status, the health-related outcomes, or any confounding health-associated behaviors. No physiological or biochemical measurements were obtained either. These were all self-reported data, prone to recall and reporting bias, which I've talked about on previous studies that I've done here, especially for the pre-diet information. Specifically, participants may have started the diet during a time of poor health and perceived subsequent regression to the mean as a benefit of the diet, and online community members may have over-reported adherence and perceived beneficial effects. Because no validated instruments are available to assess food intake frequency in a carnivore population, we did not assess portion size or quantitative intake characteristics, nor did we use dietary instruments for a more detailed characterization of the diet. These comprise the topics for future investigations. Look, if you did a randomized controlled trial, you could put these people in a metabolic ward, then you could control all those things and track all those things. Although I would make the argument that we do have technology available that if they wanted that macronutrient breakdown, they could have easily partnered with Chronometer or some other tracking and had them put in all the foods that they ate each day. Then they would know exactly how big the meals were. They would know exactly what the nutrient breakdown is in there. The technology was there, they just didn't use it. Finally, the generalization of the findings is unknown due to the existence of selection bias, because the people that chose to be a part of this study chose to be a part of the study. They weren't randomized. They said, hey, I eat carnivore, let me in your study. So they likely would have abandoned the diet if they were randomized. And so we would not have captured them had it been that way. Adults adhering to a carnivore diet and responding to this online survey represent a special subpopulation of those with very high levels of motivation and other health-related behaviors like physical activity, consuming real foods. Therefore, respondents likely differ from the general population in ways that could influence the effectiveness, practicality, and safety of carnivore diet. Related to this point, we did not obtain detailed information on diet and lifestyle habits prior to carnivore. Look, yes, if you already eat carnivore or keto and you've made that decision and you've done it for at least 6 months and you've already experienced benefit, you are going to be highly motivated. But let's not pretend like those people who start on a keto or carnivore diet have some magical willpower or motivation within them. No, you got to your frustration point. So you are very much in the category of frustrated by failure of the medical system, failure of diets that were supposed to be healthy. I disagree with their point there that, well, it's a bit biased because all of these people were highly motivated. Well, they're highly motivated because they were frustrated and at their wits' end. And if people went on this within the context of a study, they too probably would have gotten very highly motivated. Well, wow, I get to eat all this, and wow, I'm satisfied, and wow, I feel good, and started seeing the results. So I don't agree that there's some special motivation and special willpower that people in this study had that's any different than the general population. The problem is the general population is being scared to eat red meat, especially, and scared to eat saturated fat, being told it's unhealthy, being told it's going to cause cancer. And that's why they run from the carnivore diet. If they were told it's very nutrient dense and has efficacy like this study is pointing out, then maybe they would give it a go, and maybe they too would have that gung-ho-ness about doing it. Our study reports on a large group of participants following a carnivore diet with perceived health benefits and the absence of symptoms consistent with nutrient deficiencies, providing insights into the poorly characterized dietary approach. However, the data are limited by several major design limitations, a clearer understanding of the long-term safety and benefits of carnivore diet, the exact dietary habits of people following this diet, and the generalization of the findings still awaits further research. They always say that at the end of studies. Well, we had interesting findings, but we need more research. And look, that's true, we do. But I don't need more research to tell me what my own body is telling me. And at the end of the day, everybody's like, well, where's the studies? Well, I'm a study. A lot of you guys that eat a keto or carnivore diet, you're a study. All of us together, all the people, the 2,029 people that were in this study, they're all a part of the study, the wide N equals everybody study that all of us are doing this diet and doing very well. The researchers thanked Sean Baker, so he's the big carnivore diet guy, and Travis Statham for input in developing the survey, online distribution of the survey, and then the critical review of the manuscript. So again, you guys, if you came in late, brand new carnivore diet study just came out in the journal Current Developments in Nutrition. This was published in the November 2021 journal. And the title of the paper, Behavioral Characteristics and Self-Reported Health Status Among 2,029 Adults Consuming a Carnivore Diet. So thank you, Dr. Ludwig, and the rest of the researchers there. They just basically underscore what a lot of us already knew. But it's good. When you get research, research is always good. And we can say, okay, you wanted a study, you wanted research that says my carnivore diet is good? Here you go. Here you go. And I would love it if people would volunteer to put themselves in a metabolic ward for a period of time, 6 months, 12 months, whatever. It's a very expensive study to do, though. If you put people in a metabolic ward, you've got to pay them because they're going to lose that amount of time in their life. I don't know many people want to just up in their life and go into a metabolic ward and basically sit. You know, they'll let you watch TV and whatever, but you're going to be in a room, basically in a prison for a year. So you'd have to compensate me really well to be put in a prison for a year. Give me Wi-Fi. I could do my podcast from the study. Yeah, today we're on day 45 here in the diet study. I can't really talk about it, but here's what I ate today. How cool would that be? Not that I'm suggesting that. That would be funny, though. All right, guys, if you enjoy this content, go follow me over on Jimmy Makes Science Simple Instagram page. I go live on occasion. I've got another one coming up very soon that I'll be doing, again, by the same researcher and some other researchers, all about elevations of LDL cholesterol when you go low carb. Really fascinating data. So thank you so much for being here today, and we'll see you guys again real soon. Bye, guys.
Get inspiration from the Living La Vida Low Carb Show. Hey, the livinglowcarbshow.com. Woo!
Tired of playing the mask game? Me too. That's why I wanted to tell you about the Unmask. This is a breathable, completely breathable. It covers, you can't even see that it's breathable, but it's breathable. Whether you're going on a plane, having to go into a store and wearing this thing, playthemaskgame.com is how you can get this mask. They come in all kinds of colors and everything. In fact, right there, you can see right through it what it is, but when you're wearing it, it does not look like it's anything different, but it's breathable, baby. Playthemaskgame.com.